Chapter 1 from the book Left of Karl Marx, The Political Life of Black Communist Claudia Jones. Chapter 1 Women's Rights, Workers' Rights, Anti-Imperialism, Challenging the Super-Exploitation of Black Working-Class Women. We can accelerate the militancy of Negro women to the degree with which we demonstrate that the economic, political, and social demands of Negro women are not just ordinary demands, but special demands flowing from special discrimination facing Negro women, as workers, and as Negroes. Yes, and it means that a struggle for social equality of Negro women must be boldly fought in every sphere of relation between men and women, so that the open door of party membership doesn't become a revolving door because of our failure to conduct this struggle. That was from Claudia Jones, For the Unity of Women in the Cause of Peace, 1951. Participation of increasing numbers of West Indian women side by side with their men in struggle for national independence and self-governing will grow because women above all want a better life, dignity, and equality, and a better world in which their children will live. That was from Claudia Jones in an interview with George Bowron, 1956. Tangible links between women's rights and anti-imperialism mark the politics and poetics of Claudia Jones and appeared throughout the corpus of her writings. Indeed, we can say with assurance that she brought an explicitly women's right orientation to the politics of the Communist Party USA and its organizations, through which she did most of her political work during her years in the United States. Claudia Jones was a major theoretician for the CPUSA during the 1940s and 50s. Using her particular ranking position in the party during this period, she wrote 9 essays on women, most of them published in Political Affairs, the Communist Party's theoretical journal. Additionally, she would run her Half the World column and regularly write other articles on various political issues on the Daily Worker. A phenomenal output by any standards, her contribution in all of these various writings is that she brought together theoretically the intersections of race, class, gender, and anti-imperialism. By these means, given her considerable power of persuasion, she challenged the limitations of CPUSA politics as she advanced positions that would influence the subsequent women's movement of the 1960s and 70s. I just want to say that Black trans feminist theorists have done a remarkable job on carrying on the tradition of Claudia Jones and expanding theory for those who are interested in learning and evolving your politic. I encourage to pull up the Anarchist Library, in which you will find Black trans feminist theorists' works. And also, I do have free PDFs on books written on Black trans feminist revolutionaries, as well as work directly from Black trans feminist theorists. It is crucial, it is imperative that in order to have a complete analysis of the conditions in which we are in under white settler colonialism, that you study the work of Black trans feminist theorists. And I'll continue reading. Angela Davis describes it this way in Women, Race, and Class. Claudia Jones was very much a communist, a dedicated communist, who believed that the socialism held the only promise of liberation for Black women, for Black people as a whole, and indeed for the multiracial working class. In her book, Red Feminism, American Communism and the Making of Women's Liberation, Kate Wingden explicitly credits Claudia Jones's work with advancing the issues of Black women in the CPUSA and thereby informing the party's position on gender and the triple oppression, logic that would later characterize its ideological orientation. However, she also recognizes that Jones's work had implications beyond the party. She writes, "What made the Communist Party particularly unusual among other multiracial organizations working to improve women's statuses in this period before the civil rights movement burst on the national scene was that it attempted to analyze and respond to the particular problems that burdened Black women along with class and gender oppression. This work, inspired by the party's leading Black woman, Claudia Jones, made the communist movement unique among feminist organizations that existed before the 1960s and shaped the ways that second-wave feminists would conceptualize the intersections between race and gender oppression in the 1970s and later. This is a position that Wignon seems to have come to later in her career, for in her dissertation, she had concluded prematurely, it seems, that Jones's contribution was not so independent. Clearly, Claudia Jones gave to the Communist Party USA as much as she got from it in terms of theoretical orientation. In other words, if the party made Jones, she also made it at this time. For Jones was definitely and unabashedly a radical Black woman, a communist of Marxist-Leninist orientation, willing to pay the price for her political positions. She was also equally clear that she was writing as a Black woman, approaching writing as resistance literature. So while one should always use some caution in recuperating historical figures in order not to make them what they are not, Jones's own writings prove that she occupied this complex position she put on the table within the Communist Party as her refinement of Marxist-Leninism, the particular importance of Black women. But she also had other traditions out of which she lived, and outside of the party, she was able to bring some of her party positions to her work in Black communities in the United States and United Kingdom. For some other scholars, it is Jones's Marxist-Leninist politics that remain dominant, and through them, that one must analyze her positions on women. John McClendon maintains that one cannot read Claudia Jones's as feminist in the sense of having a primary gender orientation as a defining politics. For McClendon, she consistently explained the issues of gender in terms of their connection to class struggle, anti-imperialism, and the battle for peace. His judgment is valid indeed. It is articulated by Jones herself in her classic 1951 essay for the unity of women in the cause of peace. In the struggle, communist women, by their leadership among the masses of women and learning from them to fight for their demands, will fuse the women's peace movement under the leadership of the working class and will thereby help to change the relationship of forces in our land in such a way as to make for a new anti-fascist, anti-imperialist people's coalition advancing through the struggle to socialism. A close reading of this passage reveals that there is a progression in the hierarchy of importance in the stages of the struggle, with the final goal being socialism. Nonetheless, Jones's vision included an anti-imperialist coalition managed by working-class leadership, fueled by the involvement of women, before socialism will be achieved. Still, all the major ideological components are present and therefore must be accounted for in assessing her politics. Yet, as in similar analysis from an earlier period that tried to bring a female radical subject into a current feminist discourse, one has to make the case from the available published material, through the political positions taken by the subject, as well as from the subject's practice, all of which together provide the feminist equivalences. An example of this would be the work that retrospectively identifies Sojourner Truth as a feminist, when that was not how she identified herself in her own time. Contemporary reassessments of other Black female historical figures reveal a politic that today would be defined as feminist, with appropriate qualifiers in place, although they personally never describe themselves as feminists. Joy James refers to such people as proto-feminist. While there are several available definitions, generic quote-unquote feminism here is defined as a series of political and ideological movements and theories that aim to end all subordination of women in private and public life. Various qualifiers cast particular ideological positions on this generic definition. Thus, for example, Rosemary Hennessy, in her Materialist Feminism and the Politics of Discourse, defines feminism as an emancipatory, I'll read that again, defines feminism as an emancipatory movement, but also as a set of discourses born out of modernity, which has long questioned the narratives of Western knowledge, and which has offered a long-standing and productive questioning of the subject of feminism itself. This double move between solidarity and critique, she urges, has been perhaps one of the most useful features in allowing space for a materialist feminism. What we do know about Claudia Jones, and what can be asserted from the outset, is that she was a person able to make linkage between a variety of appropriate political and ideological positions, to identify multiple positionalities and the ways these are interrelated. The chapter identifies her anti-imperialist, women's rights politics from a variety of angles. It makes this case through an analysis of a variety of applicable contemporary feminist anti-imperialist theoretical positions. The two quotations from this chapter articulate an understanding of Jones's role in organizing Black women on the domestic level, that is, within the United States, as well as her internationalist role in I'll read that again, as well as her internationalist role in political organizing of Black women in the context of decolonization movements. This next section in Chapter 1 is called Black Feminist Theoretics. Claudia Jones's politics was anchored in the communist struggle for full emancipation of working classes everywhere. But as a Black woman and a communist, she saw Black working class women as absolutely central to that full emancipation. Jones consistently presented herself, as she does in this stream of self-identifications, as a Negro woman communist of West Indian descent. I was a thorn in the U.S. government's side in my opposition to Jim Crow racist discrimination against 16 million Negro Americans in the United States. In my work to redress these grievances, for unity of workers, for women's rights, and my general political activity urging the American people to help by their struggles to change the present foreign and domestic policies of the United States. Primary among these self-identifications is Jones's identity as a Black woman, followed by her origin and then her range of positions against racism and for workers and women's rights, followed by a general politics of articulation against state oppression at the national and international level. But clearly, her Black female identity was always the primary position, strong enough to lead her other positions as defined. And her role as the leading Black woman of her time in the Communist Party USA gave her the space to advance the specific issues that plagued Black women then as they still do now. She was the most prolific writer of her group of women on this issue. And as a result, we have several essays with which to make an assessment of her positions. From all accounts, the appearance in 1949 of her essay, An End to the Neglect of the Problems of the Negro Woman, made this consideration more frontally before the party. Following it, the various CP, Communist Party newspapers and journals regularly published essays and articles about the achievements of heroic women such as Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Ida B. Wells Barnett, Moran Smith, Mary Church Terrell, and Mary McLeod Bethune. McDuffie, who defines Claudia Jones as the best-known theorist on Black women's issues in the Communist Party, demonstrates that she was still just one of a group of Black women communists in this era who were also taking positions that would bring together issues of race, class, and gender. He identifies Louise Thompson Patterson, for example, as the leading Black woman in the American left during the 1930s. To this list of pioneers, we can add Maud White, a black communist woman and labor organizer who articulated the special needs of black working class women and their superexploitation as early as 1932. As a primary organizer for women of the Communist Party, Claudia Jones served as a secretary of the Women's Commission, which had Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, her friend and comrade, as its president. The only black woman among a group of 13 communist leaders, Jones was tried with Flynn and incarcerated under the McCarran-Walter Internal Security Act of 1952 during the hysterical House Un-American Activities Committee era. Claudia Jones's relationship with Elizabeth Gurley Flynn is also worth underscoring here in the context of women's rights. Both she and Flynn shared a communist analysis of the problems of women. Both are identified as taking particular positions on women's rights before and after, inside and out, their incarceration on political grounds. For Claudia in particular, these positions were always internationalist, while their feminist identifications were ones born of struggle and shared politics of women's rights within the party. Their work in the Women's Commission, where the focus was on the particular needs of U.S. women, made them both acutely aware of the specific capitalist interests that located women, and for Claudia in particular, black women, in subordinate economic positions in society. It is not difficult to argue retrospectively, then, for identification of Claudia Jones as an early black feminist. She was a black woman, clear about both the condition and the rights of black women, and the ways in which these are subjugated to a range of other interests, exploited for financial gain, and not allowed to live their fullest. She expressed these ideas publicly, orally, and in writing. Indeed, she was aware that she, her mother, and her sisters, all solidly in the black working class, were negatively impacted by these processes. Additionally, since Jones has spent a great deal of time organizing cadres of black women for the CPUSA, she saw black women as one of the party's greatest untapped resources. Her columns in the Daily Worker were consistently directed at this black female audience. The argument made by those like John McClendon, who see Marxist-Leninism as her dominant position, is that her organizing of women was primarily within the context of the advancement of workers' rights and not women's rights on their own. But in so doing, these commentators fail to understand the links that were being made between black feminism and socialism, expressed through the intersections between class, gender, and race as systems of domination. Claudia Jones, in particular, made such links. One of the earliest documents in the definition of black feminism from the Black Feminist and Lesbian Activist Group, Combahee River Collective, articulates a radical politics as follows. We believe that sexual politics under patriarchy is as pervasive in black women's lives as are the politics of class and race. We also find it difficult to separate race from class, from sex oppression, because in our lives they are experienced simultaneously. Our situation as black people necessitates that we have solidarity around the fact of race, which white women, of course, do not need to have with white men unless it is their negative solidarity as racial oppressors. We struggle together with black men against racism, while we also struggle with black men about sexism. We realize that the liberation of all oppressed people necessitates the destruction of the political economic system of capitalism and imperialism, as well as the patriarchy. We are socialists because we believe that work must be organized for the collective benefit of those who do the work and create the products, and not for the profit of the bosses. These are the positions that marked the politics of Claudia Jones and that are expounded in her articles, which constitute early theoretical texts for this line of the 70s black feminism. The fact that Jones belonged to the developing black women's movement is shown by her alliances within a number of black women's organizations and by the support she received from a wide spectrum of these groups and critical moments. particularly during her imprisonment and deportation. Various newspapers of the time published statements of support from the Black women's civil rights group Sojourners for Truth and Justice, the National Council of Negro Women, the Black and women's rights activist and publisher of the California Eagle, Carlotta Bass, and a range of others. Jones's position on women's rights was always linked to the communist struggle. As a prime organizer for the Women's Commission of the CPUSA, she articulated her Black feminist theoretics within a communist framework and context. First of all, her own life as a Black woman and her understanding of why her mother died at the age of 37 from the effects of overwork in her garment industry job informed her theoretic position and her activism on behalf of all poor, working class Black women. Two of her sisters, moreover, were domestic workers at some point in their lives. Her particular experience and personal knowledge remained with her throughout her life and were perhaps the most compelling reasons behind her choice to be an activist. She made particular mention of them in the speech she made immediately before her departure from the United States. Claudia Jones was also a member of Sojourners for Truth and Justice, also supports my argument that there is a link between her positions and current Black feminism, especially since the figure of Sojourner Truth has become iconic in the more recent phase of the Black women's movement. The Sojourners for Truth and Justice are one of the most important links between the generation to which Claudia Jones belonged and the subsequent Black feminist movement. In Sojourners for Truth and Justice, Eric McDuffie states that the group anticipated radical Black feminist organization of the 1970s and 80s, such as the Third World Women's Alliance, National Black Feminist Organization, Combahee River Collective, and Sisters in Support of Sisters in South Africa. McDuffie describes the Sojourners as an all-African American women's progressive civil rights group that sought to give Black women an independent voice in the emerging post-war Black freedom movement and to build ties of political solidarity with women across the African diaspora during the early 90s. The group named itself after Sojourner Truth, the notable 19th century African American abolitionist and women's rights advocate, inspired by a tradition of African American women's resistance and drawing from the Marxist-Leninist positions of the American Communist Party on racial and gender oppression. The Sojourners developed a radical Black feminist program. McDuffie details their politics and their activism. The proceedings reveal the influence of Communist Party positions on the triple oppression of Black women, popularized by party leader Claudia Jones, who was also member of the Sojourners. The group drafted a constitution, organized a youth auxiliary, and debated strategies to bring Black women into the labor movement. The delegates also discussed how to build ties with progressive white women. Oh, God. Sojourner sent letters condemning apartheid to the South African ambassador to the United Nations. The group took part in anti-apartheid protests in front of the South African consulate in Manhattan. Sojourners also corresponded with female anti-apartheid activists and labor organizers in South Africa. Among the Sojourners' most visible activities was an action in Washington, D.C., in which they demonstrated in the Pentagon, in front of the White House, and in the State Department, demanding civil rights protections of civil liberties, the end of the Korean War, and the respect of African American women. The Sojourners had also called for a mass mobilization in the form of a march on Washington, which, however, did not happen, for they too were the subject of U.S. government harassment. Despite their activism, the Sojourners do not feature prominently in 1980s Black feminist understandings, a fact that, in my view, explains why there was no organizational connection to that group for more recent groups, and why appropriate political and intellectual links were not always made for many in the second wave period of Black feminism, and this author is one of them. There was persistent pressure on Black women to justify the need for separate Black women's organizing, distinct from the Black nationalist movement and any other movement. From all accounts, the Sojourners had already waged a similar struggle. The Sojourners, Jones included, supported and inspired one another. In her documentary film, Bia, A Black Woman Speaks, Bea Richards, who was later known only as an actress in the Hollywood motion picture industry, identifies her poem, A Black Woman Speaks of White Womanhood, of White Supremacy, of Peace, as the beginning point of her collaboration with Louise Thompson Patterson, a Harlem civil rights activist and close friend of the poet Langston Hughes. Together, the two women issued a call to Negro women to sojourn for peace. Claudia Jones herself covered Sojourners' activity frequently in her articles in the Daily Worker, as we will see in Chapter 2, and her coverage helped them reach a large communist readership and many potential participants. Beverly Guy Sheftel, in her introduction to Words of Fire, sees Jones as anticipating a sophisticated Black feminist discourse which was a generation away, and that was reminiscent of feminist abolitionists such as Anna Julia Cooper. The best and most easily available text for understanding Jones's significant contribution to Black feminist theory is her path-breaking essay, An End to the Neglect of the Problems of Negro Women. Among the essays written on the subject of Black women in her time, this essay, An End to the Neglect of the Problems of Negro Women, is pivotal for the history of Black feminist theory, as it identifies a much more radical politic and analysis than was available at the time. In this essay, Jones builds a case for the historical role of Black women in the family and community. Next, she identifies the specific economic positions of Black women and as workers, giving us her classic definition of what she terms the super exploitation of the Black woman in terms of labor given and salary received. She identifies in this context the categories of work assigned to Black women and their exploitation as unionized domestic workers. One of the first points Jones makes is that there exists a certain militancy among Black women. This militancy, she argues, arises from the particular locations and issues of Black women which, because they are neglected by the left, limit the full extent of their political articulation. Her major hypothesis arising from this recognition is that once Black women are radicalized, the entire movement will automatically advance. Once Negro women undertake action, the militancy of the whole Negro people, and thus of the anti-imperialist coalition, is greatly enhanced. Clearly directed at a left audience, this statement recognizes Black male and white female communist resistance to this militancy as perhaps one of the biggest barriers to any successful political movement of Black and other oppressed people. This lack of acknowledgement was rooted in the neglect of the Black women question. Here, we have a dialectical materialist connection where the particular neglect of Black women leads to the obstruction of the universal anti-imperialism and class struggle. Class struggle and anti-imperialism for Jones are not materially separated from Black women's oppression. Overcoming resistance to Black women's militancy becomes a matter of struggling to build the anti-imperialist front by addressing Black working class women's needs, among other issues. In her neglect thesis, that is, in claiming that there was a neglect of Black women's issues, Jones presumes there is resistance among party members to militancy. Such a reading accents how Black women's oppression is pivotal to anti-imperialist unity and class struggle. Thus, Jones anticipates a later critique given by Angela Davis in Women and Classism, Dialectics and Oppression and Liberation. Jones's essay, An End to the Neglect of the Problems of Negro Women, makes another major argument that the Black woman, as mother, as Negro, occupies a crucial position in the defense and support of the Black family, and that this position is then super exploited by capitalist interests. It is precisely here where the possibilities of resistance lay. The Black woman's position renders her both pivotal and vulnerable to struggles, hence her potential for militancy. As Robin Kelly would assert, the quote-unquote structural position of Black people, Black women in particular, in the political economy placed them in the vanguard of the revolution, unquote. So Jones's view of motherhood was not a romanticized one as some sort of essential identity, but as a role that can be super exploited. She makes the point that the United States boasts that American women possess the quote-unquote greatest equality in the world, cannot hold in light of actual location of Black women. In Jones's words, they experienced not equality but degradation and super exploitation. Jones makes a point that can be inferred even today from a number of surveys of women's rights internationally, that while the United States claims a certain superiority over other nations at a number of levels, the way that it treats and locates its women, particularly black women, puts it far behind other nations in giving women full human rights. Jones' insight was to locate much of this treatment in the superexploitation of black women as mothers. Another of Jones's significant contributions in this essay is the link she makes between black women's role in their families and the history of African women in matriarchal traditions. Recent work by scholars like Ife Amadunde provides new information on African matriarchy. Jones was clearly aware of the available literature on this subject. In An End to the Neglect of the Problems of Negro Women, she demonstrates an advanced knowledge of African women beyond the stereotypes and more in keeping with modern African feminist understandings. She insists that the dominant position that women played in their family grouping during slavery was due in part to the conditions of slavery and the destruction of institutions such as marriage, but also to African precedent. These women came from areas in West Africa where the positions of women, based on active participation in property control, was relatively higher in the family than that of European women. Because of these factors, she argues, the role of black women in supporting themselves and their children had to be factored in the understanding of their economic needs and that of the community at large. Claudia's analysis of the position of black women is one of the clearest available black socialist feminist assertions. This essay and a second one, We Seek Full Equality for Women, also published in 1949, form the core of Claudia Jones's earlier and advanced political positions on black women. The best known and most cited is An End to the Neglect of the Problems of Negro Women, June 1949. But We Seek Full Equality for Women, September 1949, makes a deliberate link with the earlier struggles of the suffragists and contains her classic assertion that the triply oppressed status of the Negro women is a barometer of the status of all women, and that the fight for the full economic, political, and social equality of the Negro woman is in the vital self interest of white workers, in the vital interest of that fight to realize equality for all women. This assertion needs to be much better known since it is central to understanding the development of Black feminist thought. It is true that, as an educator and organizer for the Communist Party, Jones would consistently repeat the larger framing of her understanding of Black women's condition within the principles of Marxism Leninism. That is, that the position of women in society is not always and everywhere the same, but derives from women's relation to the mode of production. Hence, Marxist Leninists fight to free women of household drudgery. They fight to win equality for women in all spheres. They recognize that one cannot adequately deal with the women question or win women for progressive participation unless one takes up the special problems, needs, and aspirations of women as women. But it should also be noted that We Seek Full Equality for Women offers Jones's theoretical and political assertion on the location of the black women in the hierarchy of social and economic positions. For her, these women's rights positions had profound meaning, both for the Negro liberation movement and for the emerging anti fascist, anti imperialist coalition. As an end to the neglect of the problem of Negro women and We Seek Full Equality, both deal solidly with the specifics of Black women as they identify, as she phrases it in her former essay. The growth of militant participation of Black women in all aspects of the struggle for peace, civil rights, and economic security, and call for recognition of that fact. Because of the particular history, situation, and politics of Black women in political struggle, Claudia challenged the Communist Party to take more serious interest in the cause of Black women, who more than the Negro woman The most exploited and oppressed belongs in our party, she asked. To win the Negro women for full participation in the anti fascist, anti imperialist coalition, to bring her militancy and participation to even greater heights in the current and future struggles against Wall Street imperialism, progressives must acquire political consciousness as regards her special oppressed status. Super exploitation and the Black working class woman. Claudia Jones's best contribution to Black feminist thought is her theorizing of the super exploitation of the Black woman. The concept rests solidly on Claudia's observation that Black women, as workers, as Negro, as women, were the most suppressed stratum of the whole population. For Jones, capitalists exploit women doubly, both as workers and women. Woman has to face special oppression in every field in capitalist society as worker, a wife, a home builder, and a citizen. While most of her theorizing appears in an end to the neglect of the problem of Negro women, Jones wrote on the subject also in her column on women's issues for the Daily Worker titled Half the World. Using the economic indicator of her time, such as those from the Department of Labor, Jones was able to identify the wage rates of Black women in relation to other women and men and found them at the lowest end of the pay scale. The Center for Research on Women at Memphis State University, under the leadership of Bonnie Thornton Dill, undertook similar analysis and reached similar conclusions in the 1980s. And sadly, recent census data point to a not too different conclusion. In 1948, Jones concluded that Negro women are still generally confined to the lowest paying jobs, as women of color in general were in 1998. The super exploitation of the Negro woman worker, wrote Jones, is thus revealed not only in that she receives as woman less than equal pay for equal work with men, but in that the majority of Negro women get less than half the pay of white women. Since Black women are often heads of household, entire Black communities will remain in poverty if the Black women stay underpaid and super exploited. Jones cites Department of Labor statistics again that show that Black women workers were employed primarily in private families as domestics, as cooks or waitresses, in a range of other service industries, and in agricultural and clerical work. Professional Black women were a small minority. Jones identified domestic work as the kind of catch-all fallback profession for Black women, and in the period after World War II, domestic service was promoted as a desirable job for Black women. Ahead of her time, Claudia correctly identifies media representations of Black women as one of the sources for maintaining this identification of Black women in service roles, as well as the work that the quote-unquote mammy stereotype did in this process. From this, and a brief analysis of the historical aspects of Black women's existence, Claudia is able to make one of her major challenges. It is incumbent on progressive unionists to realize that in the fight for equal rights for Negro workers, it is necessary to have a special approach to Negro women workers who, far outproportioned to other women workers, are the main breadwinners in their families. The fight to retain the Negro woman in industry and to upgrade her on the job is a major way of struggling for the basic and special interest of the Negro woman worker. Claudia Jones therefore advances the superexploitation thesis to explain the predicament of Black women in society. Superexploitation for her refers to the ways in which Black women's labor is assumed, the way they are relegated to service work by all sectors of society, with the complicity of progressives and white women's and labor interests, including those on the left. It related to their low salary compared to the level of work they are asked to give in return. According to classical Marxist theory, I'll read that again. According to classical Marxist theory, the extraction of surplus value is the specific way exploitation takes place under capitalism. In capitalism, surplus value transforms into profit. It is in fact a source of that profit which occurs when the working class produces commodities that are sold for more than what it costs to produce them. a large part of that cost being what the workers receive in wages. Workers are paid the value of what they sell, their labor power. The surplus is the difference between the value produced by the worker and the value received as wages. Workers are then doubly exploited because they have to sell their labor power and also because they are forced to enter the capitalist production process wherein exploitation takes place. Thus, exploitation as a central concept of historical materialism occurs when one section of the population produces a surplus whose use is controlled by another section of the population. Under capitalism, exploitation takes the form of the extraction of surplus value from the working class by the class of industrial capitalists. But other exploiting classes or class fractions share in the distribution of surplus value. For example, in the form of rent and interest. Oliver Cromwell Cox, in his book 1948, Caste, Class, and Race, argues that the worker's place in the system has been primarily related to production and has been regarded as an item of cost. That is to say, as both the necessary and important factor of production and as an impediment to the entrepreneur in his basic urge to undersell his competitors. The worker then was indispensable, but he should be paid only so much as would be sufficient to keep him alive and able to labor, a subsistence wage. The idea, according to Cox, is to keep the worker in a constant state of necessity which disposed him to labor. Claudia Jones advances related arguments through her application of this principle to the overworked and underpaid Black woman. Her super-exploitation thesis rests on the fact that Black women, by virtue of being located as they are in society among the most exploited and most underpaid workers, tend to be the ones whose value of their labor power varies other class fractions, including other exploited workers, benefit from. An example would be the white left women seeking Black women as domestic workers, a practice she herself would challenge, and one that would be the source of some contention from white women, who saw critique as unduly harsh. They would. Black women in this analysis are therefore not remunerated in any way equivalent to their labor power, nor for the amount of labor they are assumed to deliver voluntarily in and out of their homes. The Black woman's labor is therefore multiply exploited. In the 1940s and 50s, Claudia Jones wrote articles that made the point framing Black women's condition in Marxist feminist formulations. The masses of Black women remain consistently at the bottom in terms of remuneration, while there is an inordinate expropriation of their labor. Thus, the super-exploitation of Black women is embedded in society's construction of them in terms of race, class, and gender. If they get half the wages of men, their rate of exploitation is more than twice that of male workers. Additionally, they are often not represented in trade unions and must face drudgery both in the workplace and in the home. Jones was clear in her articulation of the economic hardships for Black women, as workers, as Negro women, and as women. For her, the super-exploitation of the Negro woman worker is thus revealed not only in that she receives as a woman less than equal pay for equal work with men, but in that the majority of Negro women get less than half the pay of white women. Jones would repeatedly make a link between the condition of all women, particularly Black women, and the struggle for peace, arguing that the resources used to fund wars could be well applied to some of these conditions. She also contended that Black women needed to be mobilized for full participation in struggles against imperialism and fascism. Jones did not come up with her super-exploitation analysis in isolation. It is in fact related to a pattern of analysis made by other Black activist women. According to Mark Solomon in Rediscovering a Lost Legacy, women like Maud White and Lewis Patterson and Jones herself shared a belief that racism was nurtured by capitalism, which in their view sought to gain a huge advantage from the super-exploitation of African American labor and from fanning a division along racial lines within the working class. These views, in fact, caused the women various difficulties. McDuffie reports that The party's cool reaction to the sojourners deeply troubled Thompson Patterson. In response, she began distancing herself from the American Communist Party. Still, the point remains that Black feminists theorizing of the varying interconnections between race, class, and gender were operative in the early determination of a Black feminist practice, as it was in the succeeding generation. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here in chapter 1. We still have a ways to go. There's a few more sections. I want to leave a note for the listeners that as we read about capitalism, white supremacy, and settler colonialism as a whole, we also remember the super exploitation of Black trans women in these conditions, the super exploitation of Black disabled people in these conditions, the super exploitation of Black children in these conditions, and also too the ways in which these intersect. I encourage again for people to explore writings that include the fuller analysis to help build strategies towards a complete liberation of all oppressed people and the destruction of all oppressive systems. Now, these readings are going to be spaced out because in between doing direct actions is when I try to drop recordings. I will try to be more consistent, but I do ask for patience as there is a lot of work to be done. I also want to say that along with listening, that you have your own thoughts and your own criticisms. Please, I encourage you to write. I encourage you to speak and record. We need as many people as possible that are intentional and want to build a society in which we are all liberated. One of the important aspects of that is theory and analysis, and then putting those into praxis. So don't think that someone's already said it, someone's already wrote it, so that your words are not needed. No, that's not true at all, not in my opinion. I think it is very important that all voices are heard that are for the liberation of all Black people, and that we make those writings and those words accessible. I want to challenge the listeners to engage in direct action. It's imperative that those of us who are dedicated to liberation do what we can where we can. So on your jog, on your bike ride, on your walks, I want you to mask up, hide your face, and start destroying these traffic cameras on the corners. Make it difficult for the state to be able to capture those who are engaged in direct action. We all have a part to play, and we can all contribute. The surveillance state is one of the ways in which they suppress rebellion, using these tools to identify those who have the audacity to resist in order to traffic them and put them in the prison industrial complex that we know as the network of concentration camps. Let's all do our part to make it as difficult as possible. I hope you receive this reading, and I will be dropping another one until the book is complete.